This is Math Lesson 3-7, Solving Multiplication and Division Equations. You can use the division property of equality to solve equations involving multiplication. The division property of equality says that if you divide each side of an equation by the same non-zero number, the two sides will remain equal. In other words, if I had 4 times 2 equals 8, so 4 times 2 divided by 2 is the same as saying 8 divided by 2. Or if A equals B and C does not equal 0, A divided by C is the same as B divided by C. As long as we divide both sides of the equation by the same non-zero number, the equations will remain balanced. So, to undo multiplication, we will divide by the same number. So if I have an equation that involves multiplication, to solve it, I will divide each side by the number it was multiplied by to undo that multiplication. For example, if I have 0.8p equals 32, we'll notice that p was multiplied by 0.8. To undo that, I will divide. And in algebra, we don't use the division symbol as often as we do in math. We try to avoid using this division symbol in algebra. Instead, we will use the fractional division bar. Because remember, if you say 4 over 4 as a fraction, that means 4 divided by 4. So this symbol and this symbol are synonymous. They're both division symbols. So for showing division, instead of using the division symbol, we'll use the fraction bar. So I will divide by 0.8 on both sides of my equation. Multiplication by 0.8 and division by 0.8 cancels out. I like to show my problems vertically. Unlike your math book, which may show them slightly differently, I would prefer that you do them the way that I have pointed out here. So P will equal 32 divided by 0.8. Most of you can't do that in your head, so I would suggest putting 0.8 down here and 32 and actually doing the division. Remember, we can't divide by decimal numbers. We must divide by a whole number. So we need to move that decimal one place to the right, which means we need to move it one place to the right in the dividend, okay, in the divisor, so that we can add a 0. So now we're taking 8, dividing it into 320. Put your decimal point, bring it straight up. 8 will not go into 3. 8 goes into 32 4 times. 8 times 4 is 32. 8 cannot go into 0. So 32 divided by 0.8 is 40. And we can check this, just like we checked all our other problems, by placing the number back into the equation and seeing if it makes a true statement. So I want to know, if I'm going to check this, I want to know, does 0.8 multiplied by 40 actually equal 32? That's what I'm trying to figure out. So I'll actually do the math. 40 times 0.8. 0, 8 times 4 is 32. So yes, it does. 32 equals 32. This does indeed check out. I highly suggest you check. Since my check got into my problem, I think at this point I'm going to erase it now so that I have space to work on my next problem. My next problem says 3x equals 144. So 3 times x equals 144. To undo multiplication by 3, I will divide by 3. If I do it to one side of the equation, I must do it to the other side of the equation. Absolutely every single solitary time. 3 divided by 3 is x. 144 divided by 3. 3 goes into 14. 4 times 3 is 12. 3 goes into 24 8 times. So 144 divided by 3 is 48. Number 3 says 3x equals 12.6. Again, I have x multiplied by 3 equaling something. To undo that multiplication by 3, I will divide by 3. Please note, I don't use this sort of a division symbol. It is messy. It starts to look like negative signs, and when you start working with negative numbers, it's going to get really hard to read. So please get used to using the fraction bar to show division. The 3's cancel out, leaving me with x. If I take 12.6 and I divide it by 3, 3 goes into 12 4 times. 3 will go into 6 twice. I get 4.2. I highly suggest you show all your work just like I've done here. Leave all your division nearby so that if you make a mistake, we can figure out where you made your mistake. If you show your work, it's much more likely that we can figure out what's going wrong if you get the wrong answer. Let's look at a word problem. A club sells greeting cards for a fundraiser. The profit for each card sold is 35 cents. The club's total profit is $302.75. Write and solve an equation to find the total number of cards the club sells. Okay. So if you're thinking about this, the club sells greeting cards. What it's asking us to find is where, look at the question, because that's normally telling you what they're asking you to find. It wants you to write and solve an equation to find the total number of cards the club sells. That's what it's asking me to find. So I'm going to let C equal the number of cards sold. It says a club sells greeting cards for a fundraiser. The profit for each card sold is 35 cents. The club's total profit is $302.75. So I know that if I'm selling something for a profit, I get more money if I sell more things. So the cost of the item times the number of items equals the total amount of money that I make. Cost of item times the number of items equals my total. From that, I can make an algebraic equation. Okay. The cost of my item, it told me, was 35 cents. So the cost of my item is 0.35. The number of items, I don't know. That's my variable, so I will put C. And remember, in algebra, when you multiply two things together, if they're not numbers, you just need to write them next to each other. If you have a number multiplied by a variable, you just write it next to each other. The word is means equals, and the total was $302.75. So there we have our equation. 0.35C equals 302.75. Now we can solve this equation. To undo multiplication by 30.35 cents, I will divide by 35 cents. Okay, so these will cancel, and I get C equals, okay, now this is going to be a little bit more longer of a division than I need to do. It's 302.75 divided by 0.35, so if you remember, 0.35 divided into 302.75, need to clear that decimal. So actually, instead of dividing 302.75 by 0.35, I am dividing 30,275 by 35. Okay? So this is a bit of a longer division that we have to do here, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means you need to pay attention and keep your work neat so that you can actually divide it out evenly. So I'm going to think for a moment. I know 35 doesn't divide into 3, and I know it doesn't divide into 30. How many times does 35 go into 302? Well, think of this. How many times does 3 go into 30? 3 will go into 30 10 times. I know that 35 will go into 302 a lot less than 10, or at least somewhat less than 10. So I'm going to try 8. Okay. 8 times 5 is 40. 4. 8 times 3 is 24, plus 4 is 28. That seems reasonable. 302 minus 280 is 22. Bring down my 7. How many times will 35 go into 227? Well, how many times will 3 go into 22? 3 goes into 21 7 times, but since I'm halfway beyond 3 because I'm at 35, I'm going to try 6. So I'm thinking that 35 will go into 227 about 6 times. Okay, 6 times 5 is 30, 6 times 3 is 18, plus 3 is 21. That's 17. Bring down my 5. How many times will 35 go into 175, or how many times will 3 go into 17? I'm thinking 5 times, because 3 goes into 15 5 times. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 2 is 17. There we go. So I now know then that C equals 865. But it's been such a long time since I've done my problem, my brain says I can't remember what C stood for. Go back up and it's, oh, that's the number of cards I sold. So it says for a fundraiser, how many cards did you sell? You sold 865 cards. And there you have that equation. Now, to undo division, you would multiply by the same number. We were just doing multiplication equations in which to solve those we had to undo the multiplication by dividing. To undo division, we multiply, and that's the multiplication property of equality. So if I have an equation in which I have multiplication, to solve an equation by multiplication, I have to divide. Now, your book is going to show your equations a lot like this. I would rewrite this equation differently, which means if you see equations from me, they will not be written this way. I like to write my equations algebraically, which means the same equation as you see for number 5 here, which says w divided by 1.5 equals 10, will be written the algebraic way, which says w divided by 1.5 equals 10. This is the way I will always write my division problems, because I like to write them algebraically versus mathematically. So, we're going to solve this. If w is divided by 1.5, to undo division, we multiply. Multiplication is the reverse of division. So if they're dividing w by 1.5 to get w by itself, I will multiply by 1.5. And I like the parentheses or the dot. So I'm going to use the parentheses here like that. 1.5 multiplied by 1.5 divided by 1.5 is just w. 1.5 times 10 is simply 15. You just move the decimal point one place to the right. And of course we can check this. To check this, w, which is 15, divided by 1.5, does that equal 10? Okay. Well, I need to know that. So I'm going to go, okay, 15 divided by 1.5. Move that over, that's 150. Oops, 150, not 105. 150 divided by 15. 15 goes into 15 one time. 15 goes into 0, 0 times. Yes, it does work. It does check. I highly suggest you check your answers. If the assignment says to check your answers, you have to check your answers. Number 6. Again, I'm going to rewrite this the proper way because I do not like to have it written the wrong way. I'm going to do some erasing here so I have a little space. So I have x divided by 6.3 equals 9. To undo division, I will multiply. So I will take both sides of this equation and multiply by 6.3 or 6.3 over 1 because that's the same thing. These will cancel on the left-hand side. Multiplication of 6.3, division by 6.3 leaves me with x. I'm going to do my multiplication down here to make sure I'm doing it correctly and neatly. 9 times 3 is 27, carry my 2. 9 times 6 is 54, plus 2 is 56. There is one number after the decimal point, so I need one number after the decimal point here, so 56.7. You'll notice problem number 7, I rewrote the way that it should be written, because it always should be written in a way in which people can understand. So I have m divided by 2 equals 7. Because it's so close to my number, I'm going to put it down below for just a second. So now here, to undo division by 2, I will multiply by 2. Multiplication and division by 2 leaves me with m, and 7 times 2 is 14. So as you can clearly see, solving equations involving multiplication and division are just like solving equations using addition and subtraction. You look at the variable, determine what was done to the variable. If the variable was multiplied by something, you will divide by the same something. If the variable was divided by something, you will multiply by the same something. Just remember, whatever you do to one side of the equation, you must always do to the other side of the equation to keep the equation balanced.